I was driving back from a long session in the city, a heavy day on the federal bench, when I first saw the mess from a mile off. And my old pickup, she just slowed down on her own, tires grinding over the loose gravel like a nervous twitch. Because what I was seeing, I just couldn't believe it. The old wooden bridge, the one that had held our family's history across Red Creek for 3 generations, it was gone. Absolutely wiped out. All that was left were jagged planks scattered across the banks, some already half sunk and drifting lazily downstream, almost mocking me, you know. I slammed the door and ran forward, boots skidding in the dirt, feeling a cold, sick weight in my chest. That bridge wasn't just a crossing. It was the spine of the ranch, built by my great-grandpa, nursed by my father, and restored under my own hand. And more importantly, it was formally registered, marked as a federally protected historic structure for 20-plus years. And now, nothing. Just an empty span and nearby a ridiculous bright orange sign flapping in the dry Montana wind. It had the tacky logo of the Meridian Preserve Association, the local HOA, plastered above a smug little note. Unauthorized structure removed for community safety. MPA Compliance Division. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a calculated, chilling rage, as I pulled out my phone and started documenting every splinter, every footprint. They didn't just mess with Wooden Creek water. They messed with a man who spends his life wearing a black robe and wielding the law, and they didn't have a clue. But I wasn't going to show them my card yet. That's not how you play the long game. I had a plan, a quiet ambush that would make them wish they'd never, ever touched that historical dirt. Just then my ranch hand, old Ben, pulled up on his tractor, his face etched with confusion. "Judge Elias, what in the blazes? Who did this? Looks like a drunk driver with a bulldozer." "The MPA," I said, the name tasting like cold metal. Ben's eyes went wide. "The same bunch that tried to buy your back 20 last month and you told to pound sand?" "They've got some nerve," I nodded, feeling the silence between us thicken with unspoken threat. "They thought I was just another isolated rancher, someone with calloused hands and a dusty hat, someone easy to push around. They didn't see the contacts I had in D.C., the dockets I controlled, or the legal system I knew intimately from the inside out. No, I wouldn't pull rank. Not until it caused maximum agonizing damage. I drove straight to the MPA office later that day. It was all polished granite and cheap glass doors, far too pretentious for Redwood Creek Valley. Inside, the receptionist, a young woman with a practiced, bored expression, barely looked up. "I need to speak to whoever authorized the demolition of the bridge on my private ranch," I stated. Keeping my voice flat, she blinked slowly. "And who are you, sir?" "Elias Thorne," I replied, still withholding the title. She tapped her screen, then frowned. "You're not listed as a member of the Meridian Preserve, Mr. Thorne." "I know," I said, a slow smile touching my lips. "I never joined, and my land sits outside your jurisdiction. That bridge was never on HOA property." Before she could process that, a tall, balding man in a crisp, ill-fitting blazer swaggered out. His name tag read, "Russell Finch, VP Acquisitions." Acquisitions that told me everything I needed to know. "Is there a problem, sir?" Finch asked condescendingly, folding his arms. "Yes, Russell," I returned, smooth as glass. "I'd like to know why your organization committed a federal crime by tearing down a historic structure on federally registered private land." He gave that awful, short, corporate laugh. "That rickety old thing? It was an eyesore, a danger. We got complaints, you know. Our compliance team took initiative. Did you file a complaint with the county, with the state historical office, or with the federal Department of the Interior?" I leaned forward, my tone dropping like a gavel. He shrugged, completely dismissive. "Didn't think it was necessary. Thought we were doing the area a favor." "You weren't," I said, the smile completely gone. "You just made a catastrophic legal mistake." He scoffed, moving closer. "Look, if it's about some permit, we can work it out, Mr. Thorne. But frankly, if you're in our community, you abide by our rules." "I'm not in your community," I cut him off, my eyes locked on his. "My ranch has always sat outside your jurisdiction. Always has, always will." The receptionist gasped softly, finally understanding the scope of his blunder, but Finch was too inflated to notice. He just crossed his arms again, that smug smile back. Well, perhaps it's time your property became part of the community. That was it. It was never about the bridge. It was about expansion, control, and boosting their profile by absorbing a prime piece of land. They thought they were playing checkers. I was about to drop a nuclear chess piece. That night, I didn't sleep. I called a very specific contact at the Department of the Interior and quietly informed them that a protected landmark, which had been inspected just last year, had been illegally destroyed without notice on private land. Then I parked my truck at the edge of the creek and, with Ben, started stringing up yellow and black caution tape, posting new signs. U.S. protected property, trespassing prohibited. Violators subject to federal prosecution. 2 nights later, I was reviewing case files on my laptop, ironically when the trail cam notification chimed. 3 shadows, flashlights low, creeping across the creek bed. They were kicking over my signs, taking photos, trying to frame the land as abandoned or public. Ben, I whispered into the phone, adrenaline starting to pump. Get the ATV lights off. We've got company. We coasted through the pines until we were right behind them. I flipped the ATV spotlights on. They froze like terrified deer in the intense glare. One dropped his clipboard and bolted. The other 2 tried to mumble excuses about being lost. I just snapped photos, capturing their faces and their fear, then delivered the line that turned their faces sheet white. You're trespassing on federally protected property. They didn't stammer this time. They just ran. Ben chuckled, but my focus was cold steel. I printed the photos, time-stamped them, and added them to the growing file. But the game turned ugly fast. Just as I was sealing the envelope to send to Marshal Reese, a loud, heavy boom rattled the entire house. Smoke, thick, black, billowing up from the far pasture. Ben burst into my office. Judge, they blew up the tool shed. I grabbed my boots, realizing instantly, this wasn't a land dispute anymore. This was war. By the time we got back there, the shed was a raging inferno. It wasn't an accidental fire. There were scorch marks and a shattered metal can yards away. It was intentional, designed to send a message. But all it did was give me the final, unassailable piece of evidence. The trail cam footage confirmed it. Clear as day. One of the same trespassers sneaking in at sundown, followed minutes later by a huge flash. That video went immediately to my lawyer and to the U.S. Marshal's office. This wasn't just HOA stupidity. This was arson on federal land. The next morning, the local sheriff's deputy, a young kid named Rob, showed up looking baffled until I showed him my official credentials. His eyes went wide. You're a federal judge, I nodded. That shed sat on the same parcel listed in the National Registry, deputy. And they tried to burn the evidence. By noon, the ranch was crawling with state police and a bomb squad unit confirming the intentionality. The story wrote itself. A few days later, a man in a dark suit showed up at my gate. He claimed to be introducing a new zoning proposal to include my ranch in the MPA's residential plan. I just laughed, a deep, humorless sound that made him shift nervously. You blew up my shed, tore down a protected bridge, and trespassed at midnight. Now you're here asking me to join your little community. We assure you we weren't involved in any, he tried to salvage. Save it, I snapped, cutting him off. Tell your boss this. If one more foot steps on my land without a warrant, I will drag your entire board into federal court. Too late for avoiding legal action. I shut the door in his face. The pressure wasn't just physical. That evening, my internet cut out. I found a crew of yellow-vested workers by my telephone pole, trying to remove my custom booster box. They claimed they were from Ridgecom, the HOA's service partner, and had orders to pull equipment from the extended coverage zone. I showed the clearly nervous foreman my land boundary map. This isn't HOA property, and that equipment isn't yours. You are stealing private infrastructure. I pulled out my phone and started filming. You just admitted to removing private property based on an order from someone who didn't own it. That's theft. He stammered, turned green, and they abandoned the equipment and fled. They were trying to strangle me digitally, economically, piece by piece. But the final straw, the one that made my stomach twist with absolute finality, came 2 days later when Ben brought me a thick envelope with a big red stamp. Notice of property foreclosure intent. The MPA had filed a lien on my ranch, claiming over $27,000 in fabricated back dues and fines, attempting to initiate a seizure of my family's home within 30 days. That night, sitting on the porch, watching the stars over the empty space where the bridge used to be, I whispered into the darkness, "You wanted a war? Fine." I walked inside and pulled out the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. I retrieved the envelope I had been preparing, signed by me, but ready to be executed by another hand. An order for an immediate federal injunction. I called Marshal Reese. "You still got that empty docket for property disputes?" "Yeah, why?" "Because I just found the case of the year." The paperwork flew like wildfire. By sunrise, my case was on the federal docket with an expedited injunction order. The HOA wasn't being investigated for nuisance. They were facing a string of federal offenses. 3 days later, I met Agent Clara Vance, a sharp, no-nonsense investigator from the Department of Justice. "We've reviewed your file, Judge," she said, firm and respectful. "I'm taking the lead. Your case might just be the first we bring to court for what's becoming a nationwide task force on HOA overreach." The grand reveal came 2 weeks later in the packed courtroom. I sat quietly at the plaintiff's table. Russell Finch swaggered in with 3 expensive attorneys, sporting that unshakable smirk. He still didn't know who he was facing. My lawyer, Ethan Grant, laid out the evidence: the arson footage, the fake liens, the telecom theft, the federal registration of the demolished bridge. He finished by stating clearly, "Your Honor, the defendants committed multiple criminal acts under the mistaken belief that the owner of this land had no legal power to fight back. What they failed to realize is that my client, Elias Thorne, is a sitting federal judge, and his land has never been, nor will it ever be, under the authority of the Meridian Preserve Association." Finch's face cracked instantly, his smirk dissolving into disbelief. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Evelyn Reed, a colleague and a friend, listened to the defense stumble through a pathetic lie about a clerical error, then raised her hand. "Based on the evidence," she said, her voice like ice, "this court grants an immediate injunction against the Meridian Preserve Association. Effective immediately, you are to cease all actions involving Mr. Thorne's property, financial, digital, or physical. Any further contact will be considered a direct violation of federal order." I just stood up, nodded to the judge, and walked out, leaving Ed Finch to drown in the flashbulbs and his lawyer's panic. The next day, my story exploded, becoming a rallying cry for victims of HOA abuse across the country. But I didn't celebrate yet. I needed my bridge back. I called up my old crew and we began the rebuild. Halfway through laying the foundation, we found it. A rusted metal box buried beneath the creek bed. Inside were blueprints from 1947, signed by my great-grandfather with a small, brittle note: "To my sons and grandsons, may this bridge always keep our family connected, no matter what storms try to tear it down." The rebuilding became a community mission, a symbol. Ranchers brought tools, carpenters volunteered, even high school kids helped out. It wasn't just a bridge, it was a defiant statement. Then, just as the frame was going up, Russell Finch made his desperate final move. He showed up with a convoy of bulldozers and graders, armed with new, clearly forged county documents, claiming my land was now officially part of his corrected district. I marched right up to him. "You just committed forgery, Russell. I'm setting the table." Just as he was smirking, thinking he'd won the bureaucratic fight, 2 black SUVs tore up the road. Marshal Reese stepped out, calm as Sunday morning, flashing his badge. "Mr. Finch, you're under arrest for trespassing on protected land and attempting to interfere with a federal investigation." Finch's jaw dropped. He was screaming about lawsuits and corruption as they cuffed him and drove him away. The bigger picture soon came into focus. Agent Vance called and confirmed they traced the MPA's funding to an offshore development firm, a group specializing in hostile rural land takeovers. Finch was just the puppet. The attacks continued, a low-flying drone campaign used for surveillance and intimidation. We fought back with a simple, crank-operated anti-drone net launcher I rigged up in the barn, snagging 7 of their drones, all linked back to the Shell Corporation. Finally, the day the bridge was finished, gold nail hammered into the final beam, Flag raised over the creek, a man in a dark blazer showed up. He handed me a letter, an offer from the development company. They wanted to buy the ranch for millions. I didn't even blink. I folded the letter once, walked to the railing of the brand new bridge, and tossed it into the Red Creek. Some things aren't for sale, not legacy, not land, and definitely not justice. A few days later, the Department of Justice dropped the hammer. A massive press release announced a federal RICO investigation against the entire MPA board and the developers. Racketeering, fraud, wire fraud, attempted land seizure. The news was everywhere. People cheered. Congress immediately proposed the Homeowner Fairness Act, requiring federal oversight of HOAs, all because of a little wooden bridge and the people who thought they could tear it down without consequence. Later that night, the stars were bright over the bridge and the land was quiet. I got a call from Judge Reed. "Carter," she said, using my last name for formality. "They plead guilty." The whole board, the developers, a full sweep. "You win." I thanked her, hung up, and stared out the window for a long time. Peace had finally returned, not because I screamed the loudest or fought the dirtiest, but because I stood my ground. I didn't fold, and in doing so, I reminded everyone watching that no matter how powerful someone thinks they are, you don't mess with a man's legacy, and you sure as hell don't tear down his bridge. Call to action. What do you think was the biggest mistake Russell Finch made? Was it the arson, or was it the foreclosure fraud? And for those of you who've had your own HOA battles, what should be the punishment for people who use community power for pure greed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep the discussion about justice going.